which is a free-for-all Friday. We may get a few more. We'll see. But the news of the day, without a doubt, as I suspected it would be, is the early reviews and analysis, if you will, of David Lee Roth's opening night of his new solo performance, which was last night in Las Vegas at the House of Blues in the Mandalay Bay. Last night was the big unveiling of David Lee Roth's new solo show and band, and what we are now finding out will indeed be a tour that includes some festival performances and a tour that includes a slot opening for Kiss. So there were a lot of people anxiously awaiting audio, video, reviews, set list, band member, what have you, from last night. And how was Dave going to be? A lot of question marks about that. It's been a little while since we've seen David Lee Roth on a stage singing and performing. Be safe to say it's been mixed reviews now for a very long time. I think he's 65. How is Dave now, and what is Dave doing? We also know that in most recent times, we've seen Dave in the EDM world and totally into dance music and that whole vibe, which he assured us this would not be, and it was not. Definitely making sure that he has established this as a rock thing to the point that the tour or the residency is actually called something like David Lee Roth Rocks Vegas. So last night was the first night of the performance. And needless to say, last night there were already, me here on the East Coast, it was probably around midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning locally, where there was first video and audio and reports rolling in about Dave's performance being posted on various websites or social media outlets. So I started getting some texts and emails and what have you around, I guess, 12:30 Eastern time, which would have been around 9:30. I guess Dave probably went on around 9 o'clock or something Pacific in Vegas. And because I slammed right into doing this shoot and I've been tied up with it most of the morning, I did get a chance to look at a bunch of video clips. I did look at the set list and listened and watched what I could online. Now, I've said many, many times, I caution people making complete evaluations on how good something is or isn't from video posted off cell phones on YouTube or what have you. But the simple truth remains that is still a pretty good barometer in knowing what you're going to get. Because cell phone technology and the audio and video of it have gotten so good that it's kind of you can't dispute that whoever is shooting that, wherever they are in the venue, that is what they are seeing and hearing. That's what it sounds like and looks like. It's kind of undeniable. So it has become a pretty accurate barometer, as to what's going on. We've seen that over time. And what can I say about this? I've said repeatedly, if you were under the impression that David Lee Roth was ever a great singer, you'd be under a very wrong impression. I don't know if there's people out there that think that back in the day, David Lee Roth sang everything effortlessly and just like on the records. He never did. Ever did. David Lee Roth's history of vocal issues if you read Greg Renoff's book, I mean, it goes back to before he even joined the band. They passed on him joining the band multiple times because he was not a great singer. They ultimately caved to having him in the band because he had a PA. He was a rich kid. He had money. And they needed equipment. The book also illustrates that Ted Templeman, the producer of Van Halen early on, tried to consider having Sammy Hagar join at that time for the first record because of his vocal issues. Now, that being said, Dave on record has been great. Nobody could dispute that. But over time and over history, he was never a great live singer. Was he better now than he is then than he is now? Yeah, of course. But it was always more about the showmanship than anything to do with the vocals when it came to seeing Van Halen. Van Halen was about David Lee Roth, the hugely likable party ringmaster frontman, and the mind-blowing lead guitar player, delivering in a party vibe some of the greatest hard rock ever created. I mean, that was the stew. The great backing vocals of Michael Anthony, great drumming of Alex Van Halen. I mean, that was what it was. And what you have now, although they're certainly, from what it seems like in these videos, competent players, you don't have any stars on any other positions in the band. Again, very competent players from what we're hearing, but nobody of name value. It's not like he brought back Steve Vai or Billy Sheehan or any sort of big name person that would help sort of take a little bit of a spotlight away from him and help carry a show a little bit. You don't have that. You also don't have a big production. From what I've seen in the video, there's really, he's never a guy that put castles on stage, but there's not a lot going on from a production standpoint. From a performance standpoint, it's not the same thing. He's just kind of out there, wiggling around a little bit. So when you take all of that stuff away, you take away the superstar lead guitar player that's blowing people's minds with what they're playing. You take away the over-the-top showmanship aspect of what he did. You take away any level of stage production. What you're left with is a guy who is 65 years old, who's out there shaking his ass and doing the best he can. And it ain't great. If I'm going to be honest with you, it ain't great. It hasn't been great in a really long time. Did I expect it to be? No. Did I hold out reservations until I saw and heard at least something? Yeah. And now that I heard and saw what I heard and saw, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be. If you were expecting anything different, you haven't been paying close attention to David Lee Roth. I mean, you just haven't been. And the last time we really saw him in a rock setting was the Van Halen tour for A Different Kind of Truth. And on that tour, you had no Michael Anthony, but you still had Eddie Van Halen and a really good Eddie Van Halen on that tour. Unlike the reunion tour with Sammy, where you got a really bad, intoxicated, impaired Eddie Van Halen most nights, you had Eddie Van Halen back in top form on that tour. No one could argue that. So a lot in that setting is forgiven because you still have one of the greatest in history of music in Eddie Van Halen that you can look at and listen to and hear still pretty damn good on that tour. Now you take that away, and you take away the big stage, and you take away the big lighting, and you go into a club or a theater, and you got a band made up of guys that nobody knows, and that's not a diss on the band. I'm sure they sound like they're capable players. I'm not saying that. Just talking name value, excitement, marquee value. There's zero in the band. Zero. And that had to be a conscious decision, because Roth could have come at this from a different angle. He could have called Steve Vai, Billy Sheehan, Greg Bissonette. A few years ago, they almost played a couple songs in L.A. He could have called a known guitar player that would have brought a lot of attention and maybe lightened up the focus on him so much, but he didn't. He went with unknown guys here. Not saying they're bad players, but they don't bring any marquee, sizzle, name value whatsoever. Let's also be honest. If you're dealing with ego, you don't want to share a spotlight with anybody else. If you're dealing with budgets, you don't want to have to pay what you'd have to pay a big name guy. You can get unknowns way cheaper. So that had to be a conscious decision. And this is what it is. What I saw was pretty much what I expected. What I heard was pretty much what I expected. Was it good? No. Was it the worst thing that I ever have seen? No. Because it's exactly pretty much what I expected. And the strange thing is that, what I'm hearing and seeing is, first of all, backing vocals that I would, you're in Vegas. I take tremendous odds in believing that those backing vocals are being enhanced greatly by my biggest peeve in the world, recorded tracks. Can't prove it because I'm not there at the soundboard. I can tell you I've talked to people behind the scenes who have gotten in my ear and said it is absolutely recorded tracks, but if you listen to it, it absolutely sounds like it. He either hired some of the greatest backing singers on the history of mankind, or they're getting some help courtesy of an iPad or a Pro Tools rig somewhere. Because the backing vocals are freakishly spot on, which is usually a telltale sign that they're not real. Which, again, is way too common, and David Lee Roth is far from the only